Has anyone else been to Edinburgh? Well, obviously, probably millions of you have. But did anyone else go to Edinburgh and just feel like they physically got the wind knocked out of them by the sheer force of its dark, creepy beauty? Because if the answer is yes, thank God. That means I'm not the only one. Edinburgh absolutely floored me. Like, look at this. Look at these buildings. Look at this gorgeously Gothic architecture. These darkly beautiful cityscapes. I swear, if my personality and interest had an aesthetic, it would probably be Edinburgh in the rain. I don't think a single city has ever made me feel so giddily overstimulated, so emotionally overwhelmed and delightfully creeped out all at once. Honestly, the city really needs its own dedicated Dark Place Deep Dive miniseries. Between the Edinburgh Vaults, Greyfriars Kirkyard, Mary King's Close, Holyrood Palace, Brodie's Close, the old haunts of Burke and Hare, pretty much all of Old Town, there's simply too much to cover in one video. But for now, just to wet our toes, let's take a deep dive into the city's most famous, most iconic site, Edinburgh Castle. Towering above the city on an ancient volcanic crag, the castle is one of the oldest continuously occupied fortresses in Europe, a place where myth and memory bleed together so seamlessly you begin to wonder if they were ever separate at all. Long before the dramatic fortress loomed over the city, long before there even was a city crouching in its shadow, there was Castle Rock, a towering volcanic plug formed some 350 million years ago from the hardened magma of a long extinct volcano. Rising 430 feet above sea level at its summit, Castle Rock is a natural defensive site if there ever was one. On the north, south, and west faces of the rock, sheer, craggy cliffs rear up to 260 feet from ground level, with a slightly more gentle slope on its eastern face providing the only readily accessible approach. Believed by the Celts to be a site of spiritual power, the rock has been occupied by humans since at least the Iron Age. Though a castle has stood on the site since the 11th century, the iconic fortress we know today evolved gradually over the course of many centuries. From the medieval period to the present, the structure has served as a royal residence, a military garrison, arsenal, archive, treasury, and a prison. The strategic and symbolic importance of Edinburgh Castle in Scotland's history really cannot be understated. Historically, whoever held the castle held Edinburgh City. Whoever held the capital held sway over all of Scotland. And whoever held sway over Scotland was an inherent threat to the English crown. Consequently, Edinburgh Castle became a locus of intense conflict in the centuries-long struggle between the Scots and the English. The place has always been a battlefield, a stage on which the stories of nations, kings, and ghosts have played out in dramatic fashion. Over the course of its 1,000-year-plus existence, the castle has been besieged no less than 26 times, giving it the distinctive, if somewhat dubious, honor of being the single most besieged site in all of Britain, as well as one of the most attacked places in the world. Untold numbers have bled to protect and possess Edinburgh Castle. Generations of Scots and English, ancient clansmen, Highlanders, Roundheads, Covenanters, Jacobites, the Scottish Wars of Independence in the 13th and 14th centuries, the 16th century Lang Siege, the 17th century Anglo-Scottish War, the 18th century Jacobite Rising, and countless other conflicts left indelible marks on the fabric of the place. Centuries of blood have stained its stones, saturated the ground of the rock, run down the faces of its craggy cliffs into the city below. Of course, the trauma of siege and battle are bound to leave residual scars, but the stones of Edinburgh Castle hold even darker memories. One of the most infamous tales in the castle's history was the 15th century episode known as the Black Dinner, a shocking act of barbarism that would be given new life with a horrific modern readaptation. Hardcore Game of Thrones fans will know that this is the story that served as George R. R. Martin's inspiration for the infamous Red Wedding. And though it diverges in the details, the Black Dinner bears all the emotional horror of the scene that so deeply traumatized all us Scot fans. In 1437, the Scottish King James I was assassinated, leaving his 6-year-old son James II as king and the kingdom under the regency rule of James's first cousin, Archibald Douglas, 5th Earl of Douglas. Douglas's death in 1439 created a power vacuum, with custodial sovereignty shared uneasily between a pair of powerful noblemen. One of these was Sir William Crichton, Chancellor of Scotland and Governor of Edinburgh Castle. But Crichton soon tired of sharing power and control over the young king, and by 1440 he was gunning for the position of regent. To achieve this, however, he would have to break the power of the mighty Douglas family. Acting in the king's name, Crichton invited the new Earl of Douglas, 16-year-old William Douglas, and his 12-year-old brother David to dine with the king at Edinburgh Castle. On November 24th, 1440, a feast was held in David's Tower. The 10-year-old King James was reportedly charmed by his Douglas cousins. All three of them were only children, after all, mere boys thrust into a position of power and influence well beyond their years. We have to imagine James would have been delighted and not a bit relieved to find friendship with his young kinsman. But the night was about to take a horrifying turn. Mid-feast, a large plate was brought into the hall and slammed onto the table before the 16-year-old Earl. It was a black bull's head, an instantly recognizable symbol of death in the medieval period. With that, the Douglas boys were seized and dragged outside to the courtyard. A farcical mock trial was held, and despite the tearful protests of the 10-year-old James, the 16 and 12-year-old Douglas brothers were beheaded on the spot. The brutal execution of the Douglas boys was widely condemned, escalating an already bitter dynastic power struggle and further solidifying the castle's dark reputation. The ghosts of the boys are said to linger there still, caught forever in the moment between childish innocence and politically motivated execution. And they're not alone. Edinburgh Castle is said to be haunted by a veritable roster of restless spirits, each with their own stories that recall chapters of the castle's long, dark history. There's the Grey Lady, whose identity is variously attributed to either Mary de Guise or Janet Douglas. The former was the second wife of James V and the mother of Mary, Queen of Scots, who served as Regent of Scotland until she died at the castle in June of 1560. Despite her own wish and that of her family to be buried back home in France, Mary de Guise's body was kept at Edinburgh Castle for several months, placed in a lead coffin to contain the smell of decay. It wasn't until March of 1561 that her body was secretly spirited away in the dead of night and shipped back to France for burial. Janet Douglas was another unfortunate victim of the long-standing dynastic tensions between the Scottish royal family and their powerful Douglas cousins. James V bore a particularly bitter grudge against the Douglases, having been imprisoned by his Douglas stepfather when he was a boy. That stepfather happened to be the brother of Janet Douglas, Lady Glams. When James broke free of his imprisonment, he took revenge on the entire family. He accused Janet of conspiring with her brothers to poison him and imprisoned her in the dungeons of Edinburgh Castle. The charges were clearly trumped up, and James only managed to get a conviction after eliciting confessions from herself, her relations, and her household staff under torture. On July 17th, 1537, Janet Douglas was taken from the dungeons and burned at the stake on the castle grounds, while her young son was made to watch. Both contenders for the position of Grey Lady, if you ask me. Then there's the Phantom Piper. Around the 17th century, a series of tunnels were rediscovered beneath the castle. Winding their way down from Castle Rock, the tunnels appeared to follow a path along the Royal Mile in the direction of Holyrood Palace. Excavators were eager to explore the tunnels, but the passage was too narrow to admit a full-grown adult, so a child from the Royal Piper Corps was set into the depths instead, along with his bagpipes. The young piper was instructed to play his bagpipes as loudly as he could as he moved through the tunnel, while the excavation team followed the sound above ground. All went well until about halfway down the Royal Mile. Just before the Tron Kirk, the sound of bagpipes abruptly stopped. The party above called out to the boy, but heard nothing. There were no shouts for help, no sounds of commotion, struggle, or distress. Nothing but a sudden, ringing silence. A rescue party was assembled. The tunnels were expanded, and a desperate search was made for the boy. The search continued for days, then weeks, but no sign of the boy or his bagpipes were ever found. When the rescue party could venture no further into the subterranean depths, the search was finally called off. Ever since, the muted sound of ghostly bagpipes can be heard inside the castle and along the Royal Mile, moving through the walls and beneath the floor with no explanation for its source. There's also the legend of the headless drummer, whose echoing beats are only ever heard before moments of great tragedy. Considered a harbinger of impending attack since he was first spotted on the battlements in 1650, just before Cromwell's forces laid siege to the castle. There are stories of prisoners, French, American, Irish POWs of the 7 Years American Revolutionary and Napoleonic Wars, who died in Edinburgh's dungeons. Reports of cries in the dark, cold hands on your back, and the metallic scrape of chains long rusted into dust. These are just a few of the countless spirits that are rumored to haunt the ancient stones of Edinburgh Castle. Needless to say, the place is more than a monument. It's the city's heart, a living time capsule of Scotland's history. This is a place where time folds in on itself, where memory is literally carved into the rock, and where history refuses to keep quiet.